Hello and welcome to Rippercast, your podcast on Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel Murders. This is episode 20, The Case in Progress with Chris Scott. This episode has proven to be one of our most popular early episodes that we recorded with researcher Chris Scott, and it was originally released on June 22nd, 2008.
4045?
Probably something like that, yeah.
You're just outside Maidstone, aren't you?
That's right, yeah. Yes, I go to Broadstairs quite often.
I used to I lived there for about 4. It's a lovely town, actually. I've got a very soft spot for Broadstairs.
Yeah,
I used to be involved in the Dickens Festival when I lived there.
Right.
Which is just about now. It's the third week of June. I think it's this coming week. It's probably on because I used to get involved in the play. Because I used to do a lot of drama in my younger years.
Ramsgate's in Kent, also, correct?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, as far east as you can go.
Okay,
literally.
I think a lot of us have theater backgrounds. That seems to be a reoccurring theme for us. We talk about how many Ripperologists, for lack of a better word, come from a little bit of theater. There seems to be a bunch of us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I've mentioned a couple of things I've posted, and people have said, about sort of theatrical connections and that. I did originally train as actor when I went to uni in London, and then I did a year at drama school, but it was a particularly sort of low point in the theatre. That was in the 70s, and in the end I decided to get a proper job because I wanted some money. I gave it a go for a year, 18 months, and I got a couple of voiceovers in ads, and that was it. And I thought, bugger this for a game of soldiers.
Well, thank God that was the case, because otherwise we'd have lost both you and Keith Skinner to acting.
Well, I carried on doing it on a sort of amateur basis up until about, I think the last stage role I did was in about 96, because that's when all the the Menges thing started, the vertigo problems and that.
Right. How is that now?
Man, not good. But it's sort of par for the course. I'm stuck with it until it either goes into remission or whatever.
Yeah.
My sister's got it as well, as she was diagnosed with it about 6 months ago. But it's not hereditary. But it's just one of these sort of damn unfortunate coincidences.
Yeah.
It's just to put it bluntly, it's just a bloody nuisance. I mean, I'm not going to let it rule my life. But there are certain days when you have to give into it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you go out, you're feeling so disoriented and so dizzy that you might take a tumble. There's no earthly point in putting yourself in physical danger.
God, no.
And that kept you from the Brighton conference, right, Chris?
Well, it's kept me from two conferences. Yeah,
right.
It's the most frustrating thing is it's very fickle. You literally never know from one day to the next how you're going to be. So it's damn near impossible to actually plan anything, be it a commitment like the conference or social life, or friends of mine. It's always a yes, but, if a friend of mine phones up and says, would you like to go to the cinema next week, or do you fancy going out for a meal one evening, or whatever, it's always yes, but, but close friends obviously now, take account of that, but, I still get galled by it, but I think I've become sort of, I've had it for 12 years now, so I think you get to the point where you sort of, my philosophy now is those days when I feel okay, I make the most of, and the days when I'm not, it's just under the duvet and wait till it goes, basically.
Right.
I mean, there's really not very much else you can do. I've listened to a few of the Rippercast, and I was up very, very lately. I thought I listened to one because I listened to the one that you did, Paul, and then I listened to the one that Stephen did.
Yeah.
I've downloaded the Stan Russo one, but I haven't listened to it yet. But they're absolutely fascinating.
They are, aren't they? They're good. It's
I find typing chat. I mean, I chat socially on sort of various other sites and this, that, and the other. But I find it so frustrating because although I'm a reasonably competent typist, it's so impersonal.
It is.
And you never get the feedback.
You don't get the voice or anything like that. And the voice is so important in the way that
It is, and it's very nice. I mean, the only person from the casebook I speak to regularly on the phone is Norma. She phones me up quite often. And, we have long chats. We're on the phone about 2 hours sometimes.
Right.
And that takes it one step beyond. You still miss that sort of visual feedback of body language and expression and that, but
Yeah.
you know,
Well, perhaps
it's like a halfway house. But I find it much better than just sitting here typing.
Yes.
With all the transcribing, you know, it's typing something, because I'm doing all the Scotsman articles at the moment, and there are just so many of them. There's an absolute wealth of them. The detail they go into, it's quite extraordinary. And there's little snippets there mentioned that I haven't seen. Like I've just finished doing the Elizabeth Stride articles, and because one character I'm really trying to track down is Deemschutz, or Deemschutz, however you pronounce it or spell it.
Yeah.
Because I just can't find him anywhere. There's no death certificate. There's no census record anywhere. Nobody knows even what his wife's first name was, which would help.
Yeah.
And then
in America, they most did. Most of them did.
This is what I thought. I've been to the Ellis Island site, but of course that only starts from about 1892 or 3, I think. So if he left the country fairly immediately after the murder, although when was that case he was involved with, the sort of shenanigans at the club? Him and Kozabrodsky, there was that court case. Because he was inside for a short time, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
There was that sort of riot at the club. I think was that 89?
Yeah, it was later. It could have been 89, 90.
I think I found no trace of him on the Ellis Islands. But when I was doing the Scotsman article yesterday about the, it wasn't actually the inquest report. I did that today, but it was the sort of follow-up reports. Obviously, a reporter had been around and was talking to people at
Paul
in Berners Street. And
Paul dropped off, so let me get him back on. That's one thing that we want to let you know, Chris, before you continue, is that if you happen to lose your connection, hang up. There you are.
Yeah.
Are we back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your volume isn't as loud as it was first, Paul, unless you're... Hello, Paul?
Yes. No, I haven't done anything to my volume. I'm the same as I was.
Okay, that's better, I think. Okay, you were saying, Chris, about you're looking for Deemschutz.
Yeah. I don't know. You know, when you want to start the actual, because probably my take on the case is different from quite a few other people's. Because to be honest, I'm not really interested in the main suspects. In terms of them as, I'm interested in them as people and what you can find out. But I'm more like a magpie, you know, I'll flit about, I'll do a bit on Donston, then I'll do a bit on Druitt, then I'll do a bit on Ostrog, and then I'll go and look at one of the witnesses. And I feel because I haven't got a drum to beat, I can flit about really and do what I want where I want. And it's just picking up little snippets here and there. I mean, and I've got this sort of not self-imposed, I've got this sort of hit list of people I'd really like to be able to track down and find out more about.
Right.
I mean, in the great scheme of things, I mean, Deemschutz is not that important. I mean, okay, he found, you know, he was the first on the scene with one of the victims. But if one's motive were actually tracking down the killer and putting a name to him, then really he's of very minor importance. But to me, he's interesting as an individual because I want to know more. You know, I want to know what his wife's name was. I've got no idea how old he was.
That's right.
And it's just little. That's my take on it. You know, there's other people like Thomas Bowyer that I'd love to know more about.
Oh yeah.
And you had mentioned one of the articles you posted recently from the Scotsman concerned a report that kind of confused the Deemschutz with the murderer. So it appeared being chased down the street. Like the next morning or something like that?
No. What I was implying there was that there was a rather strange snippet in there, which was one of the people interviewed at the club said that there had been some kind of disturbance outside at about 1:45, and a man had been pursued down the street, but they'd lost track of him.
Yeah.
And I wondered if there was, I've got absolutely no evidence, but I just wondered if there was any connection with the Israel Schwartz incident.
Right,
which would have been at roughly the same time and involved, one man apparently chasing another down the street. Whether the clay pipe man was involved at all or whatever, I mean, it's a very murky area, the Schwartz business, but it just intrigued me that a similar sort of events seem to be happening at roughly the same time.
Right, I meant Schwartz, of course.
And the other thing, what I was saying about sort of like a possible lead into, and I haven't followed this up yet because I only typed it up the other day, and it's probably only a reporting error, but when they came to interview Dean Schutz's wife, when she was standing at the door of the club, the reporter obviously went up to Mrs. Deemschutz and asked her to wake up her husband because they wanted to talk to him. And she basically said, well, no, look, he's had a very long day, he's only just got to bed, I'm not going to go and wake him up. But throughout, she is quoted as being called Mrs. Lewis, and it definitely refers to her as the steward's wife. Now, whether they've just mistaken his Christian name for his surname, or whether there was some confusion and Deemschutz was actually using Lewis as a surname, I don't know. I've got to sort of try and follow that up yet. But it's the only alternative or possible alternative surname for him that I've ever seen mentioned.
We should keep all this for the podcast itself.
I'm recording it, actually.
Oh, right.
And
so, I mean, that was literally only 2 days ago, and because I'm still typing, because Adam was wanting some he was desperately short of stuff for the next press trawl on Ripperologist, so I've sent off what I had.
Yeah.
And but there's some very interesting stuff in there, like the other snippet about which had been reported elsewhere. I mean, none of this is brand new, but I'd rather it was on Casebook twice than not at all. That's always my attitude. Was the two women who allegedly went to the mortuary. It was at the stage at which the body of Edos was still unidentified. And two unnamed women, went to the mortuary and swore that it was a lady named Jane Kelly. We know that she'd used the name Mary Ann Kelly when she was under arrest at Bishopsgate, or in custody at Bishopsgate. But this quoted her as, they identified her as a Jane Kelly. And then there was the infuriatingly, and all these press accounts, they're so infuriatingly full of tiny little comments that suggest things that they don't elaborate on. And it said something along the lines, further inquiries showed that this individual, Jane Kelly, was still alive and well.
Right.
So obviously it had been, and you think, well, who was that Jane Kelly?
Yes.
Because, I mean, Kelly was one of the people I've done probably most work on. But anyway, sorry, I'm babbling away.
No, that's quite all right.
No, well, it's but you're quite right. Yes, I mean, the newspaper reports are very much like that. They tell you, something is being pursued or whatever, but you don't get to receive any follow-up story.
Exactly. The one who's top of my hit list, because she's certainly more important in the great scheme of things than either Deemschutz or Bowyer or any of the other ones I'd like to know more about. And we're on the message boards or wherever, people I've spoken to, there's always this business about how little we actually know about Kelly, and thus, she's a blank canvas and she's become a focus for a lot of fantasizing and romanticizing, all of which is true. But, I always say to people, well, actually, there's one person about whom we know even far less, and that's Alice Mackenzie. There's only
very little is known about her past life.
Sorry?
Yeah, very little is known about her history, right? I mean,
two alleged facts from John McCormack. One that she was around 40, and the other that she was either born and or brought up in Peterborough. I mean, we don't know whether Mackenzie was a common law name, a maiden name, a married name, whatever. I mean, that's literally all we know. So there's even less alleged knowledge than far less than there is about Kelly. I mean, I know that virtually all that we know about Kelly doesn't check out in the documentary evidence, so it all has to be taken with a pinch of salt. But because it comes from, or certain aspects of it come from various sources, we don't only, I know the vast bulk of it comes from Barnett's account, but there are sort of corroborating bits and pieces from other people. You know, there's other corroboration for the Welsh connection and the fact there was a Limerick connection. I mean, McCarthy said about the letters from Ireland, and the city missionary said he'd seen letters from her mother, and this, that and the other, and the unnamed young woman said that she spoke Welsh and all this. Yeah. So there's some degree of corroboration, but for Mackenzie, absolutely nothing, apart from, McCormick said she was about 40 and she came from Peterborough, and that's it. And so I find that intriguing. Sorry, I was just going to say, very little research has been done into the post-canonical 5 victims. So all that, agree. I mean, there's vast swathes of newspaper reports into those accounts, those murders, which we haven't got yet. Yeah, well, I bagged all the ones on the Scotsman, so there's a lot on them coming from the. I mean, there's reams of it. Good. They've collated on the Scotsman site. They've collated them into huge PDF documents. Like the first one, I've got 65 PDF documents to type up, and I'm on the third one. Right. And I hope they're all short. The first 2 when you do print preview on the text file that I sent to Adam, the first 2 generated 34 printed pages, and I've got 65 to do. So it's like a lifetime. I'm looking on it as a retirement project. It's a lot of work. Well, yeah, but it's a labour of love. It's a labour of love because I think not only it's the fact that you're doing things, which are going to be used to and interest to other people. And as I said, a lot of these press reports are syndicated. But that doesn't matter to me. I mean, as I said, I'd rather that it was on the casebook 2, 3, 4 times than not at all. And also the fact that by not endless repetition, but by going through it, and seeing it from different angles, it keeps your own knowledge up to date. Chris, where do you find time to do all of this? It seems like you're like 10 men.
That's what I was wondering too. It's like he has all this in his back pocket. Anytime anyone has a query, the next post.
No, because I've got other projects on the go as well. Because I'm writing full time now, but I've got the fiction side on the go. And I think it's just a case of I keep rather odd hours anyway because I live on my own. I can work as and when I want. So, and I'm a bit of a night bird anyway. I mean, I'll quite often work through till 1, 2, 3 in the morning, and I find I get a hell of a lot done then. I do as well. I'm really not a pretty sight in the mornings. I mean, I don't really get going until about sort of 9:30, 10 o'clock. Even though I'm up earlier than that, I'm like a bear with a sore head. I mean, all my friends know not to either phone me or come round before about 10 o'clock in the morning, because all I do is grunt. And I'm really not a pretty sight in the mornings. But by about lunchtime, I've had something to eat and get going. And I think it's just a case of, because I'm working for my own pleasure with the Whitechapel stuff. If I get bored with a certain project, I just drop it, and I find I can pour a lot of time into it because I love what I'm doing, and also because it does seem of use to other people. So there is an incentive. There's an incentive to keep going and keep posting. It's definitely of use to all of us. I was wondering, when you read certain articles that you're looking for, and do you find yourself going off on a tangent because of what's in the article? You'll find a person's name or a location or something else that'll definitely that'll set you off. Half of there's two main strings to the bow in far as one obviously is the press trawl thing, which then also goes over into the press reports column on the casebook. But the other one is the census data, births, marriages, and deaths, and all that. And I often find that I'm typing. I was doing one the other day. I was typing up some. This was 2 days ago. It was the article I was referring to in the Scotsman. I was typing up the follow-up interview stuff they did on the spot at Berners Street, and they were talking about, the reporter was going around and talking to Dean Schutz's wife and all that. And all of a sudden there was a mention of this man called Heshberg.
Right.
Which I'd never seen before. And I did a search on Casebook, and there were other mentions of him, but he's down on my list. I've got a hit list, and he's on there, so I want to find out more about him, because he was there, and he said he was one of the ones that allegedly went off for a policeman, and this, that, and the other.
I was just going to say, because there was a club meeting that night at the International Workingmen's Educational Club. Yeah. There was 100 people there, and we've accounted for very few of them, and like you say, some of the names pop up.
Exactly, and it's just little details like the two that I was typing up the other day. It's just little things, and I think, I haven't seen that before. Oh, that's interesting. It's like a magpie. I've got a sort of magpie mind, and I'll be typing through, a bog standard report that I've read time and time again, and suddenly there'll be a little nugget that I haven't seen before, and I think, that's interesting. I mean, there were two the other night. There was one. There was, as I said, there was that thing about Dean Schutz's wife being referred to as Mrs. Lewis, and I thought, I must follow that up. But then there was another one where there was an unnamed. It was a very visually accurate scene. The reporter was describing how Mrs. Dean Schutz was standing in the door, refusing to wake her husband because he'd only just gone to bed and he was very tired. And she was surrounded by this sort of knot of people in and to do with the club. And then this unnamed young Jewish chap interrupted and said about the different types of Jews. He said basically, he said there was a lot of ill feeling in the area against the club, even within the Jewish community. And he actually called them good Jews and bad Jews. And
go ahead.
He said the good Jews, who were basically the religiously observant Jews, looked down on the socialist Jews who frequented the club and really didn't want anything to do with them. And that was something I hadn't read.
Because I'd read an article actually that Alex Chisholm sent me once, and it talked about how people were upset that they were holding meetings on Sundays at the International Workingmen's Club. Some of the fellow Jews, thought it was very inappropriate to hold some of their weekend meetings there, and I found the article very fascinating. I'll have a search for it. I'll send it to you.
I'd like to see that. The other one was from the day after, because I've just finished typing up the articles on the 2nd of October, and there was an interesting. On the day after the murder, they had a committee meeting at the club, deciding sort of what their reaction was going to be, and they started anybody they didn't know. They started charging to come in, and they were charging and. The unidentified member of the committee who was interviewed said, we thought 5 shillings would be an appropriate amount. And I thought, actually, that's rather a lot.
Yeah.
That was more than Kelly's rent for the week. So what they basically said was that strangers were still welcome in, but they'd have to pay. And they actually said, that the funds would go towards what they call the propaganda. In other words, I suppose financing the magazine that was published from there and their socialist activities.
Yeah, the Worker's Friend that was published in the back. And
yeah, there was a printing press. I can't remember the name of the guy who ran it because there was one account, and he actually gave evidence. He was actually sitting in the office at the time, or shortly before. It was because it was the Arbeiterfront.
Yeah, the Worker's Friend and English translation. Yeah. And was it Philip Krantz? I think it was. To be honest, it's a long time since I've seen that mention, because when you sort of going through so many and you think, oh God, where did I see that? And it's sometimes it's quite hard to keep track of them all.
They may have also used some of that money to pay for the speakers, because that handbill that you posted up on Facebook had some pretty big names in there.
It did indeed. It did indeed, and there was. I think before we had the crash, there was a whole thread that I think either Norma started or certainly contributed to about William Morris's involvement.
And Eleanor Marx was named on as one of the speakers.
They had some quite big hitters, and I mean they were. I think they were like one of the major clubs on the organising basis. I mean, they organised. I don't know how involved they were with, all the rabble-rousing activities of Backett after the murders, because he was a much more sort of obviously, as far as I know, he wasn't Jewish, but he was involved, and he went to Tower Hill where they had all the meetings of the unemployed and all that. And I think it was those sort of activities that the club would have got involved in, as well as their social activities like the concert and the discussion, on that night. But it's all these little snippets, and I'm just interested how much is still out there. And every now and then, you think, logically you sit down and you say, for God's sake, 120 years has passed. What's going to be left? All this has been picked over and dissected and analysed, to kingdom come. Sometimes with, ludicrous. It's like worrying at a bone and trying to get the last fragment of meat off. But then suddenly something comes along, like that cache of photographs that Philip has found.
Philip, right. The Whitby collection, yes.
Exactly.
It's marvellous.
And then something really important and interesting like that comes along. And you think, well, yeah, it is still out there. I mean, we've all got this, the stock phrase, sitting in a dusty attic somewhere. But you think, yeah, there is still stuff out there. But some of it is comparatively easily obtainable. It's just been overlooked. And that's no reflection on anybody else who has been researching, because nobody can be everywhere.
That's
the more
true.
eyes, the more eyes there are out there, then I think, the more we're going to pick up.
And do you find, like, with the advent of the internet, that it has made it, like, easier for people like you to actually search out other sources?
It's immeasurable. I mean, I first started doing any searching many, many years ago, but that was only looking into my own family history. I mean, I moved to London in 1969, well before the digital age, obviously. And I remember going to the old Somerset House, as then was. I mean, the building's still there. I don't know what it's used for now, but it was the births, marriages, and it was Dickensian. I mean, when you went there, it was on various levels, and all the original registers, handwritten, the early ones, were still there. They were handwritten on parchment, with the long S's, that looked like F's and all. And you had to go there and fill in a chit and fill in a form, and then it took about 2 weeks for the certificate to come. Then you'd follow that up and go back to Somerset. It was all done manually. It was a card index system. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, it sounds. Well, I was going to say it sounds like something from another age, but digital things have moved on so quickly. It is something from another age, but at the time, that's what you did. And so everything moved very, very slowly. The idea that you would have access to not all of, but certainly huge areas of, say, the birth, marriages and deaths records or census records available online, and that you would be able to search them in a matter of seconds, I mean, would have seemed incredible. But at the time, that was the... It's like us looking forward now to what technology is going to be in 20 years' time. Well, we don't bemoan the fact that we haven't yet got that technology, because we've got no idea what form it's going to take. So, we're happy with what we've got at the moment.
Yeah, that's very true.
I think it's very easy also to overestimate the... I think people think now that the internet does everything for you. Well, it doesn't. It's a portal. You've still got to also allow for human error in so far, certainly as, say, the census records go, because the searchable index is manually input by volunteers, and a sterling job they do. I'm not knocking them. But of course, sod's law always is that the one name that you're looking for is the one that's been misspelt. I mean, it's like when, the famous example is Montague Druitt in the 1881 census. Very hard to find, because his surname on the index, which is what you search, is actually down as Druck, D-R-U-K.
Huh.
Okay.
When you look at the original sheet for Valentine's School, you can see, because it's all handwritten by enumerators, you can perfectly easily see how somebody has read that as D-R-U-K. The I-double-T is all conflated together, and it looks like a K. And then, of course,
let me get the introduction to the show in real quick, and then we can carry on. just so people know who they're listening to and who's joining us and all that stuff. Okay. So you are listening to In Progress Rippercast, episode 19, The Case in Progress with Chris Scott. Chris Scott is a researcher and author who lately has specialized in tracking down newspaper articles and census data pertaining to the Whitechapel murders, and is a co-editor of the website casebook Jack the Ripper. The books Mr. Scott has authored include 2004's Jack the Ripper, A Cast of Thousands, which is available as a free ebook on the casebook.org website, and 2005's Will the Real Mary Kelly. He is also a contributing editor to Ripperologist magazine and writes the monthly press trawl section for that publication. He's coming to us from Ramsgate, Kent in the UK. Also with us is Paul Begg in Maidstone, Kent in the UK, and Robert McLaughlin's in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I do want to get back to what you were talking about, sometimes the trouble in deciphering some of the script in those census records, and I think that does come up often on some. Well,
I think we've got a double problem in that there's a certain a significant number of individuals that one's potentially interested in the Whitechapel case who, because of the ethnic mix in the East End, were of, let's say, predominantly Eastern European extraction. And either those names become anglicised or there was a very heated debate recently which completely baffled me in the sort of venom and the ardour of it on Casebook about the spelling of Deemschutz's name.
Right.
And, the point was made that he's only called Deemschutz in the Times accounts, and in other accounts, like of the court cases, either called Deemschitz or Demschitz or Dimschitz or whatever. So you've got that problem for a start. But as I said, you've then got the added problem that the searchable index, which is what you go to when you're trying to find somebody in the 1891 census or 1901 or whenever, is a compilation, is essentially a database of manually input data by volunteers. Sterling work they do, and mistakes are inevitable. But as I said, it's sod's law. It's nearly always the person that you're looking for. And then, of course, you've got other complications of even non-Eastern European people who've got alternative spellings. I mean, when I was doing the Mary Kelly book, a supreme example is Julia Ventini.
Right.
Now, the alternative spelling of that bloody woman's surname drove me mad. I never thought I could feel such venom towards a poor woman who'd been dead for so long. Well, I don't know how long she's been dead because I couldn't find her. But she was down as Van Turney and Venturney and Venteni, and I found about 6. And of course, another classic one is Kosminski. I mean, that's unbelievably, unbelievable number of variations. It's with a Z, it's with an I, it's with an I on the end, it's with a Y on the end, and of course, all these things can lead you down blind alleys.
And I imagine, you get the same problem with common names, that there are just so many people with the name, let's say, of Kelly, or her supposed husband Davis or Davies,
Exactly.
Looking for people like that.
There's certain little tricks you get to know, like, for example, if you were searching, say, for John McCarthy. Now...
hold on a second, Chris. Paul, I just want to check your connection.
Because Paul keeps texting me. He's on.
Well, I know he can hear us, but we can't hear him, is the problem.
Okay. Yeah, I remember when I was searching... John McCarthy, of Dorset Street fame, is comparatively easy to find because he was born in France. I mean, most of the McCarthys are Irish. I think we've lost Paul again, haven't we?
Yeah, that's okay.
Shall I carry on?
Yes, carry on, and we'll try.
As I said, you learn these little tips and wrinkles. For example, when I was searching for, they often drop the Mac. I mean, quite often it's like Mrs. Carthy, who was allegedly Kelly's landlady in Breezers Hill. She's almost certainly McCarthy. Whether or not she's related to John McCarthy is a moot question, and I really can't comment on that. But so if you were looking for John McCarthy, say, in a census, he could be under Carthy. He could be under McCarthy with a gap, so it would be MC space Carthy. But what the Victorians did quite often was for the C of Mac, they put an apostrophe. So he'd be M apostrophe Carthy. It's like the police officer, McWilliam. I mean, he's often, in press accounts, he's down as MWilliam, M apostrophe William. And it's all little sort of wrinkles like that you learn, which can help.
Now, same thing kind of goes for a more simpler name like Fleming.
Oh, yes. But that can be, I think that's sometimes not only down to, well, with Fleming you've got the added complication that later in life he adopted another name anyway, and we really don't know why. Named James Evans. But the thing with Fleming was, again, when I was doing the Kelly book, I thought, now, do we put him with one M or two? That was the main. In the end, because he's called Fleming consistently throughout the press reports with one M, that's what I stuck to. But in fact, his birth is registered with two M's. And his father, Richard Fleming, is consistently in the censuses with two M's. So, and his mother, Henrietta. So, but as I said with him, there's the added complication of, when and why he changed his name before he was sent to an asylum anyway.
Right, and in your Cast of Thousands, now that was written before Mark
Well,
King,
the real Mary Kelly.
Mark King discovered Joseph Fleming in the Claiborne Mental Hospital records? Or?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
But the book that's coming out very shortly, I've had the chance to update that because Joseph Fleming is one of the characters who I go into, and I've had the chance to incorporate that more up-to-date material. Because the one we're waiting for now it's called The Ripper in Ramsgate.
All right.
And actually,
that's just tracing, what connections there are. I stress right from the first sentence of the book that I'm not saying the Whitechapel murderer ever lived in or even visited Ramsgate. It was just to look at what connections there were, and not too tenuous connections between the town and the murders.
I want to go back to Mary Kelly for a second, because of course she wrote a book on her, The Real Mary Kelly, and of course she's proved impossible to find. But what I found interesting though is that it's not only her, but some of the people associated with her are difficult to find. And I'm speaking like of Joe Barnett, George Hutchinson. You mentioned Thomas Bauer earlier. These people around her are also difficult.
I'm pretty certain that I think the Joe Barnett that was identified by Bruce Paley is the one. I mean, there were two. There were two books that came out that were specifically. There was the Paul Harrison one and the Bruce Paley one. Now,
yes.
the Paul Harrison one, I'm sure, although obviously I respect his research, I'm sure he's got the wrong Barnett. Absolutely certain, because the Barnett in Harrison's book is undoubtedly, beyond any question of doubt, is Jewish, because all the Barnetts in the East End were broadly either of Jewish extraction or of Irish extraction, and I think there's absolutely no doubt that the Joe Barnett who lived with Kelly until the 30th of October was Irish in background. He's consistently referred to as an Irishman or of Irish extraction. So I think the one who was identified by Paley, and he also did all that sterling research into the fish porter licenses and the Billingsgate connection and all this, is absolutely right. But again, there are mysteries. I mean, there are still loose ends, because even though I'm certain that the Joe Barnett identified by Paley is the right one, there is still, what happened to his mother? She just disappears. There's no death certificate. His sister, Catherine, she's only mentioned in one census, haven't been able to find a marriage, and yet she was still obviously around at the time, because, he mentions her address at Port Paul Lane.
All right, can you hear us, Paul?
I think so.
Oh, there you are.
Hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
wonderful.
So, it's all little odds. there's a pair of them. There's, as I said when we were chatting earlier, the ones I really would love to go into and find something about are Alice Mackenzie and John McCormack, because so far I've been able to find absolutely. I mean, I can find John McCormack's. I mean, plenty, but there's none that fit what little we know of him. And Alice Mackenzie is an even more impenetrable mystery than Kelly. But because this aura, this romanticism, which has not been aided by, the Heather Graham performance and the 1988 Lorimar production, there's this sort of romantic froth and fantasy has been built up around Kelly, because she was the youngest and allegedly the prettiest and this, that and the other, and the murder was the most savage. I think this mystique she's become a blank canvas, and all these preposterous sort of excrescences have been built up around her, like the royal conspiracy theory and all that, of which she's a sort of central linchpin. And I mean, the ending of although I enjoyed From Hell, don't want to digress too much into that, but the way poor Fred Aberline's been treated in both productions, only he must be turning in his grave. Yeah. But I mean, the Johnny Depp, although I like Johnny Depp very much, but I mean, and certain parts of the From Hell film, some of the set pieces and some of the set design I thought were wonderful. But, to have Fred Aberline, who was this stolid, policeman who died in Bournemouth in his 80s, portrayed as, chasing the dragon, this sort of matinee idol, looks drug fiend who died in the arms of Godley, and, had a burgeoning love affair with Mary Kelly, who then went off to Ireland to live by the coast in a picture postcard cottage to bring up the Crook child. I mean, I just sat there open-mouthed. I thought, I can't believe it. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, Aberline's been so misrepresented. I mean, what I found interesting, whether it's the '88 production or the From Hell, is that neither one had Aberline as being married, even, which I thought was bizarre.
In From Hell, he's described as widowed.
Well, yeah, and as we know, he was actually on his second. He was widowed, but he was remarried.
Oh no, he definitely was. Oh no, yeah. But in the From Hell one, Johnny Depp, there's one conversation where he's referred to as being widowed. I think it's one of the conversations he had with Mary Kelly. There's one scene, obviously entirely mythical. There's one scene where he sort of sneaks Kelly out of Whitechapel and takes her to an art gallery. It's not specified whether it's the National Gallery and so of course she happens to see a portrait of Albert Victor and says, "Oh, that's him," in a sort of almost not quite a Dick Van Dyke accent, but I'm not knocking Heather Graham because I think she's a lovely actress. But, at the head of the stairs, this is very imposing in the full military, all the red and the scrambled egg on the shoulders and all this, all the full military regalia. And she's, "God blimey, that's him, Gov," sort of, almost. And I think it's a shame because visually, I mean, parts of From Hell were stunning. And I mean, they went to such... I know it was based on the graphic novel, the Alan Moore thing, which in itself was obviously a fictional treatment and a gross departure from the facts. But I find it frustrating because to me the facts are interesting enough to actually make, a very interesting... I've never seen, I know this is a common complaint on Casebook, there's always something, and you think, why have they done that? Why do they have to make Aberline a drug fiend? Or in the Michael Caine version, he was a real womanizer, and he was a drunkard, and he woke, at the beginning of the Lorimar one, he woke up... Godley had to go in and wake him up. They'd actually stuck him in a cell for the night to sober up.
Right.
And he was having an affair with this ravishing artist's model. And you think, why do they have to sort of sex it up like that?
His family were very upset. So I was in touch with some of his, not obviously direct descendants because there aren't any, but a couple of his other descendants at the time. When that went out, and they rang me the next day saying they were fairly upset and asking me if there was any evidence that Aberline was a drunk.
Was this the Michael Caine one?
Yeah. They rang me up the next day.
The centenary one.
That's right. Yes, back in
I mean, again, and I think the thing I always remember from the 1988 one was it was one of the most marvellous camp, over-the-top performances I have ever seen, which was the guy who played Robert Lees.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
It was wonderful. I mean, I was almost wetting myself. It was pantomime. I mean, especially there was one scene where there was Robert Lees and Richard Mansfield together, and Richard Lees went off on one. You know, he started having one of his visions, and I thought, you know, why have they made him epileptic? I mean, it was so over the top, and it was so camp and so sort of melodramatic.
Who played that part? That was something quite well known.
Was it Ken Bones who played that?
I can't remember the name.
I thought it was the guy who was in MASH or something, the movie MASH, but not the TV.
Donald Sutherland. Donald Sutherland? He was in. He played Lees in a different.
I remember the name of the only one I can remember was the name of the. I remember the name of the actor who played Mansfield in the 1988 one. That was a guy called Armand Assante.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, he played Mansfield. Yeah, Ken Bones did play Robert Lees. Yeah, I just pulled it up.
Oh right. I must have having said all that, sounding hypercritical, both From Hell and the Michael Caine one. I mean, I've watched them both time and time again. You know, I'll gladly put them on and watch them. But I always, you know, if people have said to me, and sort of, you know, I've got a few friends who aren't that, you know, interested in the fact that I'm so interested in it, because an ex-flatmate of mine, he brought a friend around one evening and we were sitting there having a coffee, and quite out of the blue and without knowing anything about my interest, this visitor mentioned Jack the Ripper, and my flatmate just groaned and he said, "Oh no." He said, "We're going to be here at least 3 hours. If you want a drink, we better go now, because it's about 8 o'clock in the evening." And you know, you do have to play it down, because I'm such a bloody gabbler, and I sort of, you know, once it's like the floodgates, and people say, and then I'll start talking, and then I sort of change tack in mid-sentence because I'll say something, and I say, "Oh," and this ex-flatmate of mine, the phrase he always dreaded me saying was, "Oh, that's interesting," because that meant another sort of 2-hour lecture.
What's your take on some of the documentaries that have been? I mean, to me, I mean,
well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Do you know the best? Do you know the best one I've seen? Or the one I personally found most interesting? I don't agree with their conclusion, but I thought it was a missed opportunity. But I think all of them are in various ways. But there was one that was done some years ago, because I mean he's been dead some time, which was hosted by Peter Ustinov.
Yes.
And Jan Leeming, and she was sort of it was a little bit over melodramatic. Oh, well, yeah, we go over live now to Jan Leeming at the National Record Office and all this. But of its type, I thought it was actually remarkably well done, because they had a panel of, I think, either 5 or 6 people. They had I can't remember the lady's name, but she was
Bill Waddell and
Bill Waddell was there. Yeah. They had a lady who was a High Court judge, and I can't remember her name. And they had 2 FBI guys. They had 2 FBI guys there.
They had Robert Ressler and somebody else.
Yes. Yeah. And it was, and they went through a series of. I know they had Kosminski, and I think they had Albert Victor in there, and I think Gull was in there for some peculiar reason.
And they went through was in there as well.
Donston was in. I can't remember whether Tumblety was. I don't know.
No, he wasn't.
I think it was.
He wasn't known at that time.
It was that far back, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 1988.
Was it really?
Same year as the Michael Caine, because it was never shown in this country because Thames bought it, as I understand it, and didn't show it because they'd got the Michael Caine drama going out.
Of course, well, it was the centenary year. That was their big production. Because that was originally, although I've got it all on one tape now, if I remember rightly, when I watched that originally in '88, I think it went out in either 3 or maybe even 4 episodes. I think it was certainly quite a lengthy production.
Yeah, the Michael Caine one. Yes, I think. Yeah, that was 2 episodes, I think. But But they were too long.
And it was on a Sunday evening. I remember it vividly because I said to, in those days, I mean, there wasn't the internet and all that then, but I remember saying to friends of mine, look, between 8 and 10 or whatever it was, don't phone. If you phone, I'm not going to answer.
Wasn't there a moratorium on mentioning Prince Eddie in connection with the Jack the Ripper case, or was that just my copy of Prince Jack? Has this banned in the UK thing on it.
No, I think that's certainly. I've never heard of any. I know the only thing I know was that the palace has consistently. The palace officially, as far as I understand it, has always, as they do on most things, has simply refused to comment. But they've let it be known privately through what are normally called informed sources that they think that the whole idea is nonsensical. But I think the official line from Buckingham Palace on the whole idea of Eddie being involved in any way is simply, it's nonsense, and I'm afraid that's my view as well.
Yeah.
Right. I wasn't sure if there was I don't know. I can't recall if it was just that Prince Jack wasn't able to get published in the UK for a while,
I don't think that would be for any kind of sort of. I mean, the British press now, God, you try and keep anything out.
Right.
I mean, that would almost smack of the sort of gentleman's agreement there was during the abdication crisis. I mean, people in Britain were virtually the last people. It was being freely reported in America. But there was this gentleman's agreement; it wouldn't be reported over here. Well, nothing. I don't. The press now is so voracious. I can't see anything like that. There was the in the wake of Diana's death. There was the sort of, I suppose you could call a modern version of a gentleman's agreement that the two princes would be comparatively left alone until they were grown up. But I mean, now it's open season.
Right.
And I don't think anything. The fact that it was royalty that was mentioned. If anything, I think that would be an incentive now for it to hit the. If you can mix royalty, and that's the Fairclough book. I mean, it's got the perfect title. The Royal and the Rippers. Sorry, the Ripper and the Royals. I mean, it's you're combining the two things that are going to guarantee you a headline.
Back to Kelly. Recently, you've revived this whole Tottenham connection.
Oh yes.
Can you go into a little bit of that for us?
That's an ongoing. What happened was it was quite interesting because it's one of these things you sort of read about that happened to other people, and you're always a little bit sceptical because after the Kelly book was sort of out and ticking over, it's never going to keep me in the style to which I'd like to be accustomed, but it's doing okay. I had an email. Obviously, somebody had been. It's not. I hasten to add, it's not somebody who's a member of Casebook, but they'd been onto Casebook and private messaged me. Rather, because you can. The way I've done it, sort of open access. You can email me from the profile, and I got this rather intriguing email from a lady who lives just north of London, who basically said, there's a very strong tradition in my family about Mary Kelly. I've just read your book. Would you be interested in talking? So I emailed her back and said, well, could you give me a little bit of an idea? I said, I don't expect you to spill all the beans in an email, but I didn't say to make sure it's worth my while following up, but you know what I mean. And anyway, she just said, well, basically her great grandfather claimed that he knew Mary Kelly. She lived in Tottenham. There was this woman who had been called Mary Jane Kelly, and she married shortly after the murders and became Mary Jane Atkinson, lived in South Tottenham and was well known to this lady's great-great-grandfather and grandmother. And he was adamant that this was the Mary Jane Kelly from Limerick, and this was the story that this woman told. And it struck me, and I thought, well, there's so many holes in that, it's untrue. But anyway, the lady then phoned me, and she's now become a friend, and she phones me sort of like every couple of weeks. She phoned me actually last week because she's been in touch with her oldest surviving relative, who's an uncle of hers. And, stuff's coming out in dribs and drabs. I've now got some details which I'm waiting for a little bit more about a brother of this Mary Kelly, who was called Patrick Kelly, who I've got some more information about. And when I started checking out, everything she'd said, not obviously the putative connection, but the factual details that she'd given me, to my surprise, did check out. Because normally these family stories, including ones in my own family, which are not Ripper related at all, but which I've checked out, there's usually holes in them, but you can see how the misinterpretation has arisen. But all of the people involved did exist, and she married when she said she did, and her maiden name was Mary Jane Kelly, and she was Irish. Her father wasn't called John. He was called Dennis. He was a sergeant major in the army, and she kindly forwarded part of his army papers on to me. So that's really the state of play at the moment. I mean, it's one of these cases where the lady involved, especially having seen some of the discussions on the message boards, said, look, I'm quite willing for this to go onto the casebook site, but he said the only condition is that please, you mustn't include anything which could lead anybody to identify me. She's not doing a Greta Garbo and being over dramatic, but she really wants nothing to do with it. She's willing for the information to go out there, but she doesn't want to be pestered. And do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like some of the descendants that Neil Sheldon has contacted.
Yeah.
Annie Chapman and Eddowes, who don't want to be identified.
Exactly. And I think there have been other people who've been have even come onto the message boards and sort of either claimed to be relatives or descendants. There was a lady who came on who was had some family connection with John McCarthy, and there was some great hoo-ha, and sort of the message board imploded and she buggered off basically, and was never heard from again, but without imparting the family information which she said she had. So, which I thought was a bit sad, as a bit of a loss. Even if it turned out to be nonsense, if it's given in good faith, I think it deserves investigating. And the lady that I've spoken to, who's the source of this Mary Kelly in Tottenham story, although to be frank, and she knows this because I've made it clear right from the beginning, I think the historical basis for the story is nonsense. I think it's interesting insofar as it occurred so quickly after the murder. This woman was claiming to be the Mary Kelly of Miller's Court fame back in sort of 1891. Because, the guy who, this ancestor of hers, this Alfred Joel, from whom the story came, was absolutely adamant that this, and I kept saying to, I nearly said her name, but I keep saying to, whenever I speak to her on the phone, I said, do you know why your great-great-granddad was so adamant that this was the Mary Kelly of Ripper fame? She said, I don't know. She said, that information is just lost. She said, but he was absolutely adamant. She heard this story from her grandmother.
And it's pretty amazing, though, that all of these things are checking out.
Well, there's certain. Well,
not to connect her to Mary Kelly of Miller's Court necessarily, but that there is this history that you've been able to uncover in the census.
I think what we've probably got is a lively account of a fantasist. I think this woman who lived in Tottenham, Mary Jane Atkinson as she was by then, and she lived through into the 1920s. I think we've got a lively imagination. It was 3 years after the murders. Whether she was like dining out on it or just being a Walter Mitty character, who knows?
Yeah.
But the two things that intrigue me are the very bizarre circumstances surrounding the death of this lady's ancestor, the one from whom the story originates, in that he was a carpenter. And again, she sent me a copy of his death certificate and a local press account of the inquest, which verifies exactly what she said. He was a master carpenter and joiner, and he was working for another company in Tottenham, and he hanged himself in 1896 in his 30s. I think he was 37, this Alfred Joel. But the bizarre thing is that the last thing he did before he hanged himself was he made his own coffin, which I find incredibly bizarre.
But you'd sort of expect that of a Victorian. You wouldn't expect it today, though.
I presume so, yes. But I know they had a very... But no, the thing that... making coffins was not his normal. He was a jobbing household carpenter, even though a master one. He was basically a cabinet maker. I mean, he wasn't this. I don't know how the hell he hid it, but apparently, this works where he worked. They did not make coffins. It wasn't like his normal job, and he had to make one for himself. It was obviously like a special project, and then whether he left a note or whatever, but it was made clear that this coffin was for him, and then he hanged himself at the place where he worked.
Right now, it could have been to spare his family the expense. I don't know if
quite. I think they had a much more practical. I think some people now find the Victorian attitude towards death, macabre or even ghoulish. The idea of we become so sanitized and removed from it. The idea of say a wake, with the coffin open and you go up and you either kiss the corpse or even see the corpse. Let alone, obviously the details of things like the Ripper murders. I think we're so sanitized and divorced from death. I mean, large number of people I know have probably never even seen a corpse. Not that I wish it on them, but of course I think in Victorian times it would have been a much more common occurrence.
Yeah.
Irrespective of violence, I don't mean that you'd walk out and fall over a Ripper or similar type victim, but even if there was a bereavement in your own family, it would be much more common to actually see the corpse as a physical act. Whereas I think these days, it's very unusual. And I think a lot of people feel very uncomfortable with it. I mean, when I worked in a hospital, when I was a student, I worked as a hospital cleaner in Hammersmith Hospital, which is right next door to Wormwood Scrubs, during the 3 years when I was at uni. And there were 3 areas of the hospital where they only relied on volunteers. This was nights. That was the mortuary, casualty, as A&E as would now be, and the operating theatres. They never insisted that anybody worked there. It had to be volunteers. And they had hell's own job to get anybody to clean the mortuary. I mean, it was... I did it for 1 week when the normal guy was away, and I simply said, it's the living who worry me, not the dead. It's like walking... it's like walking through a churchyard at night. I mean, I've got no qualms about it. I mean, they're lying there quietly doing whatever they're doing, and I'm walking through, if they don't worry me, I won't worry them.
Robert? Yes, I'm trying to reconnect with Paul. We're having connection problems, obviously.
Oh, it's a shame.
With Paul. Hopefully he won't give up on us, and we'll try to get him back. So.
Yeah, because before you went off on a tangent, because as you said, you do that when you speak about the Ripper.
Oh, I do.
In your book, The Real Mary Kelly, you identified a Mary Ann Kelly. You had links to Carnarvon and Flint, I believe. And
yeah.
I was wondering if you've kept pursuing her since you published about 3 years ago.
No, I think what it was that I think all that from the sources that I had then, and because of her lowly station in life, I mean, she's not likely to be mentioned unless she did anything wrong. The only sources of information were the census and the births, marriages and deaths. And I think, I'd traced her as far as I could. And I wanted to make it clear, and I hope I did make it clear in the book, that I wasn't putting her forward as even a remotely possible Kelly candidate. It was more an object.
Yeah, it's very clear in the book. Yeah,
it's more an object lesson saying, of all the criteria we have, if you take the Barnard accounts, both the inquest one and the police statement, and you take the various peripheral accounts, and you lump those together, who is there anybody who comes even remotely close to fulfilling those? And of course, she doesn't. All it was that she was the only one who came remotely close. She didn't marry a Davis. She didn't marry a miner who was killed 2 or 3 years later. There's no proof she came to London in 1884, whatever. So I think it was both a sort of demonstration of in some ways of how weak the Barnett account is purely in research terms, in terms of what you can verify, which is zilch. And also, it's this thing about putting a name in the frame, and it's all a question of percentages. And well, is she more likely? We found. A.P. Wolfe did it. When we were going through the infirmary registers, you can you can find a prostitute called Mary Kelly who's approximately the right age, and everybody gets excited. But I mean, to me in itself, that's not that particularly significant, because it's not that uncommon a name. Certainly Mary Jane wasn't. And having done the Kelly book and having sort of carried around tinkering, with various bits of sort of Kelly-related material since, and I said actually in one of the threads on the casebook, I think the inevitable conclusion, which is I think a lot of people are reluctant to accept because it seems to come down like a brick wall, is that her name was not Mary Kelly.
That's probably a good bet. Yeah, that's probably a good bet.
And I think, I think I think the stage we've got to now, I think, is almost a damn certainty, because every avenue that people have tried, has drawn a blank. The Cardiff Infirmary doesn't check out. Davis, the Collier doesn't check out. Barnett was insistent that, the amount of, when you first read, and as I said this in the Kelly book, when you first read the Barnett account, and say his, if you take in tandem his inquest statement and the police statement, when there are slight variances but nothing material, then you tend to get excited and you think this is great, because this is one victim where we know a hell of a lot about. There's a hell of a lot here to get my teeth into as a researcher, and then of course it's doubly frustrating because you get nowhere. And absolutely nothing. And he's so specific and he's so precise in his alleged information. He says she married when she was 16. She was legally married, and her maiden name was Kelly. He says all those things quite specifically. And you think, good. If she was 25 years old, she was born in 1863, i.e. she married in 1879. Bingo. Look for Mary Kelly who married to Davis or Davies in 1879. Bob's your uncle, and of course there isn't one. So, it's that either what she told him was a load of twaddle, or was it slightly... Once you get into this thing about, embellishment, and we know they weren't above it, it's like, I always compare it with the Princess Alice thing that Stride told.
With Elizabeth Stride, exactly.
Which we know was factually was nonsense. I mean, you can see probably why she did it. It was a tearjerker. It was probably to elicit sympathy. But there again, there's the question of, if that was so, then why is there no record of her making a claim on the quite substantial fund that was raised, for the victims and their families? Because presumably, because of her sort of precarious financial hold on life and the fact that she went to the Swedish church on more than one occasion and received financial support, you'd have thought that at the time of the aftermath of the Princess Alice disaster, if she was telling this story at that time, and of course we have no evidence that she was, because the only evidence we have is later, around the time of the murders, that she had told this, but we don't know how long previously. We don't know whether she started telling this story shortly after the disaster, or whether she thought it was a good money spinner. Because I presume she would have looked at or had read to her, because there's this thing about the literacy of the victims again. But there again, it was a blank canvas, because there was this list of identified and unidentified victims published, certainly in the Times, but I can't imagine that Liz Stride is a Times reader. But this would have been read out, so they may even have been posted up in public, because they invited people to go along and view the bodies of those who hadn't been identified. But I mean, we know her husband was still alive anyway, John Stride.
Until 1884.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the problem is trying to decide to what degree and with what motive Kelly was fantasizing, or covering up, or simply building a mystique around herself, or if her past as related by Barnett was completely and utterly invented, then the obvious reason is why. What had Kelly got to hide? But I think that there are little snippets that come from other people. Obviously, in terms, say, of a percentage, 95% of what we allegedly know about Kelly comes from Barnett. That's not surprising. They'd been living together as de facto husband and wife for 18 months. But there's the unnamed city missionary. There's various women that she knew. All these accounts, they do. The background in Wales is confirmed from one source. The letters coming from Ireland, the connection with Limerick is confirmed by the city missionary, who said he'd seen letters from Kelly's mother, so and so on and so forth. So I don't think you can doubt that she told that story to Barnett. I don't think Barnett made the story up. I think you then have to go back one remove and say, did Barnett relate that at the inquest in good faith, believing what Kelly had told him? There are discrepancies, as I said, but and there's intriguing little snippets, like the time when Barnett says that, and this wasn't in the inquest testimony, it was in one of the press interviews of Barnett. They tracked him down to a pub near the lodging house where he was staying, and Barnett says two sort of very interesting things. One is that on one occasion Kelly's father came to London looking for her, and she found out about this and hid. Now, whether that gives a clue as to why all this invention. And the other one was that in the same interview he said quite specifically that the brother who was in the army, who in one version is called Henry, the one who was nicknamed Jonto, did, at least on one occasion, did come and visit Kelly. So that's the only sort of very tenuous evidence you have for any kind of links with her family, which of course then leads on to the often asked question, why did no member of her family show up for the funeral or come forward when, the fact that she'd been living a disreputable life as an unfortunate, the other four victims had, but still friends and relatives came forward and tried to give them as decent a burial as they could.
There's also a story about letters being left behind from her family. Isn't that true?
Yes, there was stories of I think at one time McCarthy claimed to have or to have received letters, which he then passed on to her. I don't know whether she used the shop in number 27 as a sort of poste restante, as like a PO box. But then if she had,
he did claim they were from Ireland.
Yes, he claimed one of them. The one account I've read, he actually specifically claimed they were from her mother.
Yeah.
Which I mentioned in the Kelly book, you then get into this tortuous speculation, and because it's so ill-informed, you can never resolve it, as to, when did they come to Wales? When could you logically expect to pick up Kelly in the census? If she was born in 1863, which is by no means certain, because the fact that she's 25 and her death certificate is only speculation. Because it includes both of the surnames, she's down as and also the Franco form of her name is down as given by Barnett. She's down as Marie Jeanette Kelly, also Davies, on the death certificate. But if she was born in 1863, then Barnett, these nebulous phrases. He said she was brought to Wales when very young. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean 2, 3, 5, 6? If she was born in 1863, then she should be in the Welsh census in 1871 because she'd have been about 8 years of age. But none of these things is so frustrating because none of these things tie up, and this is why I think she's become such a sort of object of desire for researchers. I don't.
But there are those little clues, the letters, and her brother supposedly. I mean, that does kind of it. If there's, let's say this woman invented the name Mary Jane Kelly, it could still point to something of an immigrant from either Ireland or Wales, as opposed to like born and raised in the East End and totally fabricating her background. So
if the name Mary Jane Kelly is a, I was going to say a nom de plume, but nom de guerre or whatever you want to call it, is an alias. Even if all the rest of what she told Barnett is substantially true, or even totally true, if her name was, if she was Jane Doe, and then, married in 1879, married David, it's still going to make her incredibly hard to find, because you've just got nothing to go on. Because if the surname was invented, then obviously some of the information coming from Barnett, like that, or the information about her father, certainly his name, he specifically says he was called John Kelly, he worked as a gauger in an ironworks in Carmarthen or Carnarvon, so on and so forth. Well, there's no indication when he died, but as I said, there's this interview with Barnett when he said the father came to London looking for her, which obviously suggests a family rift, and if the letters were true, as I said in the real Mary Kelly, the most likely scenario to me, and it is, and I always try to emphasise, almost feel like putting it in capitals. Look, this is speculation, but the most likely scenario seemed to me, and there's absolutely no evidential basis for saying this, was that Mary Kelly came to London from Wales, presumably to go into service or to follow some kind of respectable, with her family's blessing. I mean, my grandmother did the same, and we lived in Surrey. When she was only 14, she moved to London and went into service in the very early 1900s. Now, if Kelly had done that and had been keeping in touch with her parents by letter, but had fallen on bad times, shall we say, and had ended up in Whitechapel in the street, well, on the street rather, then, that she may have been lying to her parents. Oh, everything's fine. I found these lovely employers and this, that and the other. Dad might have found out, came steaming up to London to find out what on earth was going on. That's why she hid, because, she was ashamed of what she'd become. But again, that is utter and complete guesswork.
Right. And another possibility of the hundreds is that she had a background similar to Catherine Eddowes, in that she, could have been from a large family.
Yes.
Who's
yes.
And maybe her father was a widower.
Yeah.
And the kids were split up. And she was sent at a young age to learn a trade, but drifted into prostitution.
Exactly.
In a similar situation to Eddowes. So.
I find it hard to, if somebody of Kelly's position in life, of her, social status, economic status. I'm talking about by 1888. I know she claimed to have been of a sort of much higher status when she was in the quote gay house in the West End and went to France and all this and went around in a carriage. But I'm talking about latter days in Whitechapel. If she wanted to assume an alias, and considering the number of people in the case that, we only really know by nicknames, and they all had, well, they're not all, but, a lot of them had nicknames. There was Pearly Poll and Long Liz and Fair Emma and all this. I find it hard to understand why she would have gone into such incredible detail, to have invented a whole family and the Welsh connection and an occupation for her father and the name of her husband and how she got widowed and then the trip to Cardiff and all this.
Right.
Either she was a sort of pathological liar and a sort of female Walter Mitty and ended up believing this cock and bull story herself, or the story was substantially true and the only thing that was changed was the name. But of course the name is the linchpin, and without the name it makes tracing the rest incredibly hard, because, sod's law again, she has to go and marry a bloody Davis in Wales, which is one of the most common, if she'd married somebody with a much less unusual, trying to track down, if the story's substantially true and her name's not Mary Kelly, you've then got to sort of look at it obliquely, sort of lateral thinking, and think, well, how can I'm now looking for a miner called Davis, who married in 1879 or thereabouts, who died in 1881 or 1882 in some kind of a pit-related explosion, whose wife was 16 when he married him, who came from Ireland, and it makes it near impossible to trace.
In Fleming, he was around 20, in his late 20s when he would have been hooked in with Mary Kelly. I believe his age was given maybe as 28 when he was in the Whitechapel workhouse in 89. So, I mean, you're talking about a pretty young couple there.
Yeah, I think there's a huge undercurrent with Fleming. As I said, I think I remember saying in the book, he's the one character that I'd love to know a hell of a lot more. Fortunately, through some great research since, we found out a lot more, especially about the latter part of his life. And again, there's this mystery of why he, shortly after the murders, adopted an alias. Became James Evans, and we don't know at what stage or for what reason. Especially, his mother is still on the patient records, the paperwork. His mother is still referred to by her real name. On his death certificate, it gives both names. It says James Evans, also known as Joseph Fleming.
Right.
And But no, he's an intriguing character because although we can find him in the records and we can trace him and we can trace him in various censuses. We know about his family. We know where he came from, where he was born, and he was a plasterer. And without getting too Mills and Boon or Barbara Cartland about it, it's very, very easy, again, using Kelly as a blank canvas, to read this great torrid romance into it, whereas it might have been quite an abusive relationship. But what intrigues me are the hints from the people around Kelly in Miller's Court, who said, oh yeah, she knew another Joe. She was very fond of him, and he still used to see her, and he used to give her money. And then another witness says, oh yes, he used to knock her about as well. He ill-used her, I think was the phrase. And then the one that really intrigues me is this, and I've only ever seen it in one source, was this newspaper account. It was an interview with Mrs. Carthy. And that pleased me because, there's these previous landlords and landladies of Kelly's, one of whom was the very oddly named Mrs. Bookie, who we've never been able to trace. But Mrs. Carthy, who lived in Breezes Hill, was actually tracked down and interviewed. When I read that interview, because there was lots in there, and I thought, that's it. Again, that dreaded phrase of mine, that's interesting, because she confirmed that there was a strong relationship between Kelly and Joseph Fleming. She actually specifically said in the interview that she thought that Fleming wanted to marry her, which I thought was quite interesting. And then also there's this very mysterious incident of Kelly turning up on Mrs. Carthy's doorstep shortly before the murder with a strange man. Now that's always intrigued me because I'd love to know who that was.
Right.
Because she turns up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and again, like Barnett with his phrase "very young," Mrs. Carthy uses this phrase "shortly before," and she says shortly before the murder, Kelly, who had been away from the area of around the Ratcliffe Highway for in excess of 18 months, suddenly out of the blue, sometime shortly before the murder, use her phrase, Kelly turns up on her doorstep at 2 o'clock in the morning with a man that Mrs. Carthy didn't recognise, and asked if she could have a bed for the night.
Right.
Which I find very, very strange. I don't think it could be Joseph Fleming, because from the way the earlier part of the interview is worded, it sounds almost certain that Mrs. Carthy knew Joseph Fleming, at least by sight. So it's unlikely it was him. Why on earth would it be Joseph Barnett? I mean, if she was by that time living up in Miller's Court, and there's certainly no mention that I've ever heard of that, in the period immediately preceding the murder, that she was at any stage by McCarthy either evicted or locked out.
Right.
Why would she walk all the way from Dorset Street right down to Breezes Hill, right down by the Ratcliffe Highway, and it's a hell of a way, at 2 o'clock in the morning with a strange man? And why would she ask for a room for the night? Again, there's these frustrating unspoken...
Yeah, it makes you wonder.
I know.
What about the man Morgan Stone or Morgan Stern?
Complete mystery, unless you there's the only sort of putative identification is a Dutch one. It's either Barnett, and Barnett's the only source for that name. Either Barnett misheard it. The two possible variants, and I don't personally find either particularly convincing, is Morgan Stern, S-T-E-R-N, or Morgan Steen, S-T-E-I-N. There was a Morgan Steen traced in the right sort of area, but he just doesn't ring true because, he was there in the 1881 census, he was in the 1891 census. He appears to be a happily married man with kids. He's living with his wife in 1881. He's living with his wife in 1891. He could have either had a bit on the side, to use a horrible phrase, or the marriage could have broken down temporarily around the time when he allegedly knew Kelly, which presumably was sometime around 1885. then, but I don't know. We've even, I say we because I've done, but I know certainly other people. The other possibility is that Barnett heard it all as one word, but they were talking about a man called Morgan Stone. Stone was the surname. But again, the only one in the area at that time was about 2 years old, I think. There was a Morgan Stone in approximately the right area, but he was an infant. So I think, Morgan Stone is one of these complete mysteries.
Back to Joseph Fleming real quick, in that there seems to be, correct me if I'm wrong, about a 30-year gap in his records. He's admitted to the infirmary in November of 1889 for an injured leg, down as a bootmaker, I believe, or something like his occupation may have changed, because it seems like this is irrelevant to my point, but I think he was a dock laborer, and then he was recorded as a bootmaker, and then he was back as a dock laborer.
Yeah, I know. On his death certificate, definitely he's down as a dock laborer.
Right, and so he's living at the Victoria Home on Commercial Road when he's admitted to the infirmary in '89, and then
which smacks of George Hutchinson.
Right, that was what I was going to bring up. Is that there? Initially he's sent to the City of London Asylum at Stone in 1895.
Yeah.
And then transferred to Claybury, which is in Romford.
Which is where he died.
So
in the 1920s. Can't remember exactly. 1926 was it?
Yeah, I believe he was.
He
died in 1920, I believe. But so yeah, there's on the message board speculation. Oh, Joseph Fleming living in Victoria Home. Transferred to Romford, where he dies. It does smack of George Hutchinson. Do you have any opinions on that?
Pending in that, and to my shame, I cannot remember. I'm terrible. I can remember names to do with the Ripper case, but when it comes to friends I can't remember the name of the researcher who established the link between Fleming and Evans. Who was it?
Mark King.
That's it. Well, he obviously had access to the initial patient records when Fleming was, because he mentions them in his posts, when Fleming was admitted to Stone, which is also in Kent. Stone's near Dartford. But I'm in the process, I have actually emailed them twice now, the PCT, which is NHS gibberish for the Patient Care Trust, under whom, because Claybury Hospital has now ceased. It survived a remarkably long time. I think it was still going up into the 1970s or 80s. But I'm trying to track down the patient records for Evans / Fleming when he was at Claybury. Because what I haven't seen listed anywhere is what condition he was actually diagnosed with.
Right.
He was obviously. I mean, he was certainly a long-term inmate. I mean, he was. He was in an institution of some kind for the best part of 30 years.
Right.
So, I mean, there must be something there. So I'm in the process, and I'm hoping to get transcripts of those in the fairly near future. But anything to do with the NHS moves incredibly slowly. I think he was. Yes, 23rd.
And he was tubercular.
Yes, he had.
Anyway,
hang on a minute, I can tell you.
I believe that was the cause of his death. It's tuberculosis.
Yes, it was
easily something he could have picked up in the hospitals.
Yes, he was down. It was 28th of August, 1920. Joseph Fleming, otherwise James Evans, male, 65 years. He was actually 61 because he was born in 1859. From City of London Union Infirmary, previous address unknown, dock labourer, cause of death, pulmonary tuberculosis, 6 months and 13 days. And I found him, he's also listed in the Claybury Asylum in the 1901 census is just down as a 45-year-old dock labourer born in Bethnal Green.
Under James Evans?
Under James Evans. Yeah, he's under James Evans in the because one of the projects I did some time back was transcribing the admissions registers from the Whitechapel Infirmary for the period of 1888 and into 1889. And at that stage, when I started that project, which was about 2 years ago, which I posted onto the casebook, I didn't know about this link between, because then somebody else, this research about Fleming / Evans was posted elsewhere on casebook, and then somebody suddenly said, well, hang on, even this, because one of the things I said was, it's not clear as to when Fleming became Evans or whatever. Then somebody pointed out that there were at least two entries on what I was posting of the right age. One was on the 23rd of May, 1888. There's a James Evans, age 28. His address is down as 16 F Block, Royal Mint Street, and he's down as a porter. And he was brought in with as unsound mind. And then the 3rd of July, there's a James Evans, age 28, specifically down as a railway porter, 16 F Block, Glass Street. So the number is the same. It's a rather distinctive number, 16 F Block, and he's down as insane. But
this
he was discharged.
1888.
Yeah, this is the second admission was on the 3rd of July, 1888, and he specifically, the condition was listed as insane, but he was discharged, and it doesn't say that he was discharged to the either Claybury or any of the Banstead or Colney Hatch. It just says discharged, so right. Presumably at liberty on the 9th of July, so he was only there for 6 days.
But then Joseph Fleming is admitted under Joseph Fleming.
Yes.
On 16 November 1889 for injuring his leg.
Yes.
And that's when the Victoria home address is given.
That's right. So you've got these two names, or potentially, if the James Evans, who's listed twice in 2 months for obvious mental problems, if that is Fleming, then it suggests he may have been, for whatever reason, using the name of Evans before the murders, rather than changing his name for reasons unknown afterwards.
Right.
But again, it's only a possibility, because it depends on whether you accept that the identification of those two entries in May and July of 1888, whether that James Evans, 28-year-old porter, is the same as the James Evans who was previously Joseph Fleming. But I think he's quite an important character, and I'm really itching to get my hands on, if they still exist, the patient records, just to find out what his behaviour was, because you've got nearly 30 years worth, presumably, of asylum records or inmate records, just to see exactly what he was up to and what the diagnosis was.
Right. It would be really interesting. Now, Robert McLaughlin had to leave, so it's down to just you and I.
Okay.
I did want to ask you, with the researching the census records. I don't know if a lot of people, I get the impression sometimes, and this is not my impression, that on the message board sometimes people kind of glaze over when they see ream after ream of census records. But it is hugely interesting in my opinion.
I'm sure they do. I think it depends on. It's such a huge field of study. It goes back to this. I don't know if you've seen this recent thread, which was rather unflatteringly called Jack the Ripper for Dummies. There was this suggestion that there should be a sort of primer, a sort of beginner's guide.
Yeah.
And I think that's got some merit, but my take on that is that this field has only become so huge because we've made it so. There are by definition there are huge areas of so-called Ripper studies that, if all truth were known, are completely irrelevant because the person in question has nothing to do with the case. All of the research to do with Johnston is highly interesting and gripping, and he's obviously a rather strange individual. But if you accept that he had nothing whatever to do with the Whitechapel murders, from the point of view of priming somebody on the Jack the Ripper case, it's entirely irrelevant. Personally, I think all the Sickert-related research is irrelevant. I don't mean it's irrelevant in its own right. I think it's fascinating in its own right because he's a very, very intriguing individual. But just from the very narrow, blinkered perspective of, trying to find out what facts, in inverted commas, there are to do with the Whitechapel murders, it's very hard to keep that tunnel vision, especially if somebody like me who gets so easily diverted. But I can understand somebody's eyes glazing over or mentally glazing over. But there are other sort of nerds like me who like to, pick over the bones of, and it's the joy of a site like Casebook is that you can pick and choose. Quite often when I log onto my PC in the mornings and I go to the Casebook site, obviously, the first thing you click on is today's posts, and there'll be whole areas that I never look at because right. I'm really not interested. And that, again, that's not in a derogatory way, but we're all made differently. We've all got different focus.
Right now, but back to what you were saying about being dismissive of Sickert and Johnston and such.
Yeah.
At the same token, you've done census research into Francis Coles and Elizabeth Jackson,
I've done
torso victim.
Well, no, I've done I've done a lot of census research on Johnston. I mean, without blowing my own trumpet, I think the one find that I'm most proud of is Johnston's death certificate, his date of death, because that was previously unknown.
Right.
In 1916, and it was two books previously published on Johnston had specifically said that no record could be found and no record did exist, and did he go to the continent, did he move to America? But so because my own sort of interest and my own sort of research interests are not suspect based, I find that incredibly liberating because it means I can go where I want. If I feel in a Sickert mood, I can. But that's because I'm also interested in Sickert as an artist. I'm not only interested in him, I'm not even primarily interested in him as a potential Ripper suspect, because I don't think he is. But he's an incredibly influential, 20th century, and he happened to live 2 miles from where I live anyway. And I know people who knew him, and all those things tie into me much more immediately and of much more interest to me than any potential connection to the Ripper case. I think Sickert was deeply interested in the Ripper case, but all this, I've got to choose my word carefully. I was going to say twaddle, because so much has been said that has got absolutely no evidential value, because once you start analysing paintings, and once you start reading meaning into paintings, and once you start reading meaning into titles of paintings that Sickert had a really impish and almost childish sense of humour, and the titles to his paintings were deliberately obscure and probably meaningless in some cases. And when you start subjectively analysing paintings towards a particular goal, I think you're in very dangerous territory when it comes to actually proving a line of argument. Because when I watch the TV programme, I really don't want to get drawn into the Patricia Cornwall debate, because it's something upon which, to be quite frankly, I haven't really got very strong feelings. I've read the book. I don't agree with the argument. But when I saw the TV programme, and I know the editing of TV programmes is very different from reading a fully developed argument in a book, but the way that was presented to me was completely the opposite of the way that I think evidence should be approached, because she gave quite a touching background to the beginning of the case, and she said that she was motivated to bring some closure, this awful modern word, bring some closure to these women who had been victims, and that too often they were forgotten, and they were real flesh and blood creatures who walked the streets and this, that and the other, and they had a very hard life. Well, I think, if she'd actually looked at Casebook, I think that's mentioned remarkably often in Casebook, and they are respected. Right. And then she, using obviously a theatrical analogy from again, we come back to this, what was mentioned right at the beginning, this theatrical connection, because obviously Sickert had that, with his Nemo and his acting connections. And but I remember her quite distinctly the phrase, because it made me think immediately. This was like into the first 5 minutes of the programme. She said, "Oh, and there was a suspect waiting in the wings." I thought, well, no, that's entirely wrong. You don't sort of look around for a suspect and then marshal what facts you can to condemn them. You look at the facts first and see where they lead you, if anywhere. And I defy anybody to assemble, to go to Stewart's book on the ultimate source book on this, that and the other, go to the primary source material of what evidence there is. I defy anybody to be led from that to Sickert. I just don't think it's possible.
Right.
What she's done is pick the suspect first and work backwards.
Right. And a suspect that everyone knows had been presented before, and it's in a completely unbelievable setting now.
Yes, I think there'd been previous, there'd been the Sickert and the Ripper murders, and the Florence Pash and all that stuff, and undoubtedly Sickert was certainly in his later life a rather eccentric character, and I think he was always a little, in the artistic sense of the word, bohemian. I mean, I think he revelled in the being an artist and being on the fringes of sort of respectable society and being able to go, as an artist, because he was considered or expected to behave oddly and in a bohemian way. He could go to places where a more respectable person, he could go to gin palaces and he could go to music halls and he could go to low dives and he could go to theatres and paint and all this. And really nobody would turn, because it was part of his image, the sort of eccentric artist. Whereas if a gentleman, I know they used to go slumming in the East End, but and I think he certainly had a rather macabre interest, certainly in the Camden Town murders.
Right.
And various stories, if you believe the Osbert Sitwell story about his version of the Lodger, which was the one that the Hitchcock film was based on, the Belloc Lowndes, right. The Mornington Crescent one. But that in itself, is not remarkable or condemnatory. Any more than she makes great play of the fact that he did
the painting of Jack the Ripper's bedroom,
which he specifically entitled Jack the Ripper's bedroom. But I think in terms of actually value as evidence, it's nil. You can read into that painting what you want.
Right, census records shows that there was another lodger that now I'm going off of memory here, but as far as the story of his lodger, the story that Sickert was told when he was renting the room that supposedly depicts what later became in the painting Jack the Ripper's bedroom was not the veterinary student, I believe, in the story. It just didn't match up. The description of the lodger that Sickert occupied the bedroom of. I think
what annoyed me in that passage was I think Cornwell either deliberately, possibly not deliberately. I've got to be very careful what I say. But I think the import of that title was misinterpreted. Let's put it that way, because her argument appears to be that because that painting entitled Jack the Ripper's bedroom was a painting of Sickert's own room at Mornington Crescent, she therefore read into it, i.e. Sickert equals Jack the Ripper.
Right. Which is missing the point.
She's missing about 3 steps. What to me the point is, Sickert was obviously intrigued by this story, I presume, and the elderly couple had allegedly said to him, do you know who lodged in your room, some years ago?
Right.
So what he was saying was that, Jack the Ripper equals previous occupant of room now occupied by equals, Walter Sickert.
Yeah, that's
not. You're going straight from A to Z instead of having all the intervening steps in between, which I think is a bit naughty. And I'm always. It's like when you go to. This is going to sound like a very, very strange analogy. I'm always wary. I mean, I'm not a great believer in the supernatural. I know some people on Facebook are, and I respect anybody's beliefs. But I always get a little bit suspicious when you go to a premises that's supposed to be haunted, or you sit down around a Ouija board and have a séance, and it's always big names. You know, you always get Napoleon or Beethoven or, you know, Caligula or whoever. You never get Fred Smith from down the road.
Right.
And I'm always innately suspicious when a new suspect appears who's, you know, Oscar Wilde or Charles Dodgson or Queen Victoria or whoever, and it's some great prominent name from the period. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, my gut, and I've got absolutely no basis for this, but I'm a firm believer in the local nobody.
Right.
I believe that during the period in 1888, so, you know, the so-called Autumn of Terror, I'm absolutely convinced that he lived, if not in, certainly very close to the area where the murders took place, and he knew that area intimately. And I'm convinced he was you know, the one letter that intrigues me, again, you know, the letters is another whole area, but there was and it's not signed Jack the Ripper because it was actually the first letter written. It predates the Dear Boss letter. It's that intriguing letter where he claims to give his name and address, and it's been blacked out. And he specifically says he was a horse slaughterer and that he was looking for Annie Chapman. It was sent very shortly after the Chapman murder. And he says, it starts off and it says, I'm in misery with nightmares. It's in Stewart's book, you know, The Letters from Hellbert. And that letter has always intrigued me. I'm not saying that was from the killer, but that's the sort of letter I would expect from the killer, not the beautifully written, beautifully scripted Dear Boss letter. Right.
That's the 24th September letter.
Yeah.
With the silhouette of the knife drawn on it.
Yeah, there's the I'm doing this from memory.
And a coffin also.
And it says quite endearingly on the second page, because there's the outline of the coffin, and it says photo of knife, I think. Is that the one?
Yeah, it is.
Which always struck me as rather odd, you know. Photo is such a sort of up-to-date word. I presume then that they referred to a photograph as a photo, but it always struck me as rather odd. But what's intriguing about that is he claims to give both, in the middle of the first page, he claims to give both his name and address and the name of his employer. Because he says, you know, my name is, I can't remember, but they're blacked out. And then he says, and I work at, and there's two lines following with this. And I always wonder if those lines have been, you know, if they were looked at under sort of ultraviolet light, would there be anything underneath them?
Right.
Because as far as I know, that letter is still, unlike the Lusk letter or whatever. I mean, I know there are some letters of which we've got copies where the original, like the Lusk letter, it no longer is in existence, you know, certainly is not in the public domain. There's only copies of it known. But as far as I know, that one is still physically in existence and in the public record office. And rather than Patricia Cornwall and all her dabbling about with mitochondrial DNA, I'd love to put that one under an ultraviolet and see what's underneath.
Definitely. Back to suspects. I know you're you don't consider you named the unknown local man as a favorite. What do you think of candidates like George Chapman or Tumblety and those sorts? By the way, the 24th September Dear Boss letter is reproduced in Letters from Hell.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's probably still at the Public Records Office.
Yeah. Is it credited there as the Public Record Office?
Well, it's stamped, but
oh, good. That means it's still in existence. Yeah. Yeah. Because I know, as I said, I know that some of the important ones, and probably the most important is the Lusk letter. Physically, I mean, it may well, whether it was weeded in the past and is now in a private collection somewhere, or whether it's mouldered away and is now dust, I don't know.
Well, this has a docket number 244 FF4 and 5. I don't know exactly what that refers to because it's not. It doesn't say it's held at the MEPO, so that may be the docket number for the Public Records Office.
What's that? Is that the 24th of September one?
Yes.
Oh, I'll have to look back. Sorry, you were saying about Chapman and Tumble.
Just to finish up,
yeah,
the envelope's reproduced as well as the letter.
Oh, it must be in there.
So
then
it's probably still there.
I'll email Stuart and see if any work's ever been done on it, because that would intrigue me.
And but it does appear that something is written under where he says name. And
that's what I thought. Cause I scanned it once from the letter, but I mean, you need much more. I scanned it once and reversed it. I put it as negative, and there definitely appeared to be something under there. So I think there is a name under there.
Right. But yeah, I was just going to get your opinion on some of the other suspects. I
better qualify when I say the what's called the local nobody. That's if I were pressed. I must sort of emphasise that I'm not really a suspect man. I'm not saying I don't care who did it, but if somebody said to me, right, draw up 5 questions that you can have answered from on high about Jack the Ripper. Actually, the actual physical named identity of the killer would be pretty low down my list, because there's other things about the case that interest me much more, which I know is unusual, and I'm not saying I don't care about the suspects, because I research them as much as I do the victims and the witnesses. But I view the whole. I don't really like the word Ripperology, but the whole area of sort of Whitechapel studies is like a portal, and it takes me into areas that I would never normally go into. I would not normally read about 19th century policing methods, or know that Lord Salisbury was the Prime Minister, or Henry, who the Home Secretary was at the time, or whatever. And it takes me into whole areas of study, some of them incredibly obscure. When I was doing some research on Tumblety, I found there was a French-Canadian paper. And Tumblety at one time was prosecuted for administering this potentially lethal, or supposedly potentially lethal medicine. And I found this, which is on the press report somewhere, I found this incredibly long, detailed. They actually had in this French-Canadian paper the full sort of lab report of exactly what was in this substance he'd been prescribing. And so
was this Portmore, or was this the one where he caused?
Yes, it was related to the alleged
James Portmore death.
And they did some laboratory tests on what he'd been, and there was this. I mean, it was like 2 full pages, and it was in French. So you then get involved in sort of translating from Canadian French lab results on potential poisons, and I thought, well, that's not an area I would normally go into, but it was absolutely fascinating, and it taught me a lot. And so the suspect-led side of things, although, each new one that comes along, and I'm amazed at how many there are, some of them you get gut reactions to, but I try always not to, when Uncle Jack came along with the, the Williams candidate, and then you get the Joseph Silver, the flies in the sand thing, which I've got but I haven't read yet. And then each new one that comes along, you try to keep an open mind, because you always think, well, the next one might be the right one. That might be the clincher.
Right.
But then I think, well, some of them I think are so plainly absurd that I'm still a sucker enough to read the book, although what I think is potentially the most absurd book is the one about Lewis Carroll and the anagrams and all that.
Right.
And I must admit that book I haven't read, and I have no intention of buying. Now, that may be sort of narrow-minded on my part, to dismiss somebody's research out of hand. But, any involvement in Oscar, any complex, far-reaching conspiracy, Freemasonry, royal, it always sets off alarm bells in my head, because I'm sure that the truth was actually much simpler. There was one deranged individual with a very complex mindset, which, thank God, I could never fully understand, who was wandering the back streets of Whitechapel for 10 weeks, 12 weeks, whoever you include as victims. Certainly of the 3 named victims, the McNaughton Memorandum, I think, personally, I would completely exculpate Druitt. Kosminski is extremely interesting, but I don't find the case entirely convincing. Ostrog, I think, now has been, fairly comprehensively cleared because of the fact he was, in prison in France at the time.
Yeah.
Sickert, again, I think, the clincher is, although there's all this minutiae about, well, he could have written it on that day and do that. I mean, he was in France at the time. He wrote to his mother. And although the letter isn't dated, I think from the external evidence surrounding that trip to Dieppe when he went painting, he was there with his brother, and he wrote home to his mother.
Right, and then
he wasn't even,
diary entries that don't coincide with those letters. Point to him being in France as well. His mother's diary, I believe it was.
Yeah. Tumblety is a fascinating one because the reason that I think you have to take Tumblety very seriously is because, well, for two reasons. Firstly, he was, until the little child letter was found, he was completely unknown this side of the water. And when I read Stuart's book, Stuart and Keith's book, it was I can imagine their surprise when they started researching the American papers, because it just seemed so odd, especially when the papers were awash with, and it amazes me that the British papers didn't pick up any of these American press reports naming Tumblety as a suspect.
Oh yeah, especially when it's in the New York Times.
Exactly.
It's just
I'll tell you,
like
because I'll tell you
or something. I mean, these are
exactly. I'll tell you what really amazed me and impressed me was that, considering all they had at the time was the wireless telegraph, what amazes me is how quickly these reports went around the world.
Right.
And the most extreme example, and I had to check it and double check it and triple check it, Kelly's body was found at about 10:45 on the morning of Friday the 9th of November. And initial reports, she wasn't named, but initial reports of that murder were published in a newspaper in Australia later that day. There is actually a paper dated the 9th of November with a preliminary report about the Kelly murdering.
Wow.
And I thought that would be impressive today. I know we've got virtually instant communication now. So, the fact that all these syndicated press reports were whizzing around the world in various forms, and you see incarnations of the same ones over and over again. But it just amazes me that there was no feedback from, the other side of the pond about Tumblety coming back, especially when it was right at the height. I mean, he was arrested in November, skipped bail. Well, he arrived back in New York, I think, on the 4th of December on the Le Havre. And it amazed. I mean, it's still, very much, it was all the brouhaha going on about it. It was still very much the topic of the moment. I mean, it was still only, a few weeks after the Kelly murder. And, the fact that he'd skipped bail as well. And I'm just amazed that, I mean, I can imagine their surprise, when they started digging into American papers, which just said, they just called him the Whitechapel suspect, or who is suspected of connection with the Whitechapel murders. I mean, it was quite open.
Oh yeah, right from the beginning.
They didn't hint at it,
right.
And there's that lovely sort of grey area, because we've got the paperwork to do with his arrest on the alleged charges of indecency with the three young men. Or the three men, we don't know their ages, Doughty, Fisher, and I can't remember the name of the third one, which was in November. That was in the July. But then he was arrested again in November, and there's all this, what happened, because there's, as far as I know, there's been no mention found in any British records specifically linking Tumblety with the murders, or even suspicion. The only judicial records that I've seen are on these three alleged counts of gross indecency.
Right, and then you have Tumblety himself claiming to have been arrested on suspicion of being Jack the Ripper.
There was that wonderful article found. Again, it just shows you what's out there. There was that wonderful article found late last year, which was, the thing about the hat. And, it was obvious that he was questioned.
Right. And I think aside from John Pizer, he's the only contemporary suspect to ever deny publicly he was Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. Yeah. But possibly Thomas Sadler, if you include Coles as a potential victim.
Right.
What amazes me, as I know, being a teetotaler. I used to drink, but I've seen the very strange effect that some drink can, have on some people. But when you read some of the accounts, right at the height of the murders, about, the bizarre things that people said, they go into a police station and say, I'm the murderer. Then, the number of people who owned up, some were charged with it.
Right.
And actually appeared in court. And they said, well, no, Gov, actually I was drunk. Mm-hmm. And you think, God, what a dangerous game you were playing. It's a bit like going on Big Brother. It's almost as though people would do anything for the sake of notoriety, anything to be in the public eye. But, not at the end of a rope.
Right.
I find that sort of, I know there's this strange, mental aberration about people wanting to confess. Whenever you get a high-profile murder or series of murders, quite often you'll get people confessing who patently had nothing to do with it. But, I do find it bizarre that, they're lucky that in some cases they're lucky they weren't lynched, let alone actually get to a court and be condemned.
Right.
Certainly there was, I can't remember his name, there was one individual who specifically confessed to the Mitre Square murder and actually appeared in court charged with it on his own account. But then it was apparent that he was roaring drunk at the time and it was dismissed. But no, all of these, as I said, Tumblety, I think, has to be taken seriously. All one can assume is any British connection or any British evidence that actually linked him with the murders was contained in this file that Little Child mentions. In the Little Child letter, it says, it hints that there was a pretty substantial file on Tumblety at Scotland Yard, which, of course, has long since gone. Hopefully still exists somewhere. I'd love to have a leaf through that. But of the others, Chapman, there's this insuperable problem of the sort of change of method. I find it very hard. I know there have been instances, but to me it's a pretty major thing to go from being, the kind of killer that Jack was, to being a wife killer using poison.
Right.
To me, it demonstrates a completely different mindset. However twisted you consider him logically, if you think of Chapman's crimes just as Chapman or Klosowski, forget about his Ripper connection. But if you consider his crimes just as Chapman, however bizarre, you can see some kind of twisted logic to them. You can actually assign a rational motive to them. Either he, hideous though they were, you can understand why he would want to get wife X out of the way. Either a newer model had come along, or there might have been some financial incentive or whatever.
Right.
But you can. To me, the whole problem with the Ripper crimes is trying to assign a motive, because the trap they fell into, the psychological trap they fell into at the time, and repeatedly people still do, is trying to assign a rational motive to it. Because to me, the whole royal conspiracy, Farrago, arose because people were trying to attribute a rational motive to what to me are a series of irrational acts, or they're based on a rationality that is so twisted and so beyond normal reason and logic that we can't understand it.
Yeah.
The argument was, if we can find a logical set of circumstances, i.e., threat to the throne, risk of exposure, all that, then a clique of blackmailing prostitutes led by Mary Kelly, pose a risk to the status quo. That gives it a logical motive. And to me, that's like the cart before the horse, because you're looking for the motive first, rather than looking at the evidence and seeing where it leads you. Because to me, if you look at the evidence, it's the more unpleasant aspects, that you have to dwell on, such as the post-mortem reports, the mutilations, the taking of the organs. To me, they give a much more incisive pointer to the frame of mind and the whatever motive there was of the killer than any kind of cloud cuckoo land rationale like the royal conspiracy theory. Because to me, you're building a construct on sort of foundations of sand. They just don't hold up.
Right, I agree. Now, I do want to ask you one more question about before we wrap this up. We're a little over 2 hours.
Oh my God, it's not, is it?
Yeah.
Well, I did warn you once I get talking.
No, that's okay. I started the podcast kind of recording before I actually introduced the show. So.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, back to taking one of the things I find interesting in this census research is that you're able to not only track the movements of individuals through the East End, but you also present information on just the almost the history of the tenants of the buildings. Now, granted, there's in some cases a 10-year gap, between who lived at one address in 1881 as opposed to 1891, so on. Yeah. But you are able to give this as fluid as it can possibly be history of just some of the buildings in the East End.
Well, it's like not only, the one I've posted today is the only thing I've posted today because there was some dialogue going on one of the threads about the tenants of 9 King's Bench Walk, where Druitt had chambers. And so yesterday I posted a listing of all the not only number 9, but the whole of, because King's Bench Walk, it was 1 to 13. So yesterday I looked up and typed out the tenants of 1 to 13 King's Bench Walk as listed in 1881, and today I did 1891. Again, you learn little tricks and wrinkles because the source that I use, which it is a pay site, but it's ancestry.com. But on there you can search the 1881. They've obviously structured the registers that they input for the volunteers in slightly different ways, because in 1881 you can search by address as well as by surname. But in 1891 you can't. You can only search by name. So what I did yesterday was I searched by address. I just put in King's Bench and then London, and it came up with, and I found King's Bench Walk and typed them all out. You then have to hope, and you use various sort of little twists of, a bit of logic. And I was looking through, so I had a list of all the tenants from 1881. And I was sitting here this morning and I thought, now what's the chances that any of those tenants were still living there 10 years later? Because some of them, you always go for the more unusual names first and more obscure places to be born. And about the third one I tried, which was a guy called Anthony Green, he came up. So because I typed him into the 1891 one, and it came up as King's Bench Walk. So then, and they were also in different parishes, completely different parishes. So, because that's the other way you can search. If you can establish the parish in the 1881 census, sometimes that can lead you to the 1891. But, it was like finding out, sometimes it can take hours, literally hours, just to find one address. I wanted to find, going back to the Sickert version of the Lodger's story, because I knew he lived at 6 Mornington Crescent. He came back to England in about sometime between 1905 and 1908. I can't remember the exact date. And that's roughly when he would have heard the story. So obviously the lodger referred to would have been long before. It would have been, about 17 years before, if it was 1905, the time of the murders. But I wanted to look up 6 Mornington Crescent to see who was there at the time, because on the hope that they would still have been there when Sickert, because 1901 is the latest census because of the 100-year rule. It's the most recent census to which we got access. In 3 years' time, we get access to the 1911 census and so on. And I found this elderly couple who were there. George, I think the surname was Brown. I did post it on the casebook. So, it's all little twists and wrinkles like that. Sometimes you have to project. You take a seemingly minor piece of information from one search and you project that to help you into another search maybe 10 years later or 10 years 10 years earlier.
Now,
so
how are you able to determine that 9 King's Bench Walk was unoccupied in 1891?
Because there is one column in the census which I don't normally include, because if you're going to include people at an address, then by definition it's inhabited.
Right.
But there's one column against an address it's the third column in from the left, and it says I or you, which is inhabited or uninhabited.
Oh, okay. I had understood you to say that you were unable to search by address in 1891.
No. So, but when it says 9 King's Bench Walk uninhabited, it means 9 King's Bench Walk is listed, but it's specifically down in the census return as uninhabited.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't mean I couldn't find it, because if I couldn't, I'd always say so. But if any address and it says uninhabited, it means I have found it, but it's specifically listed as having nobody living there.
Okay.
Because all it says is, in this particular column, it just says you. So it's I, and then it goes to split it down into households if it's a multiple occupancy place. But for 9 King's Bench Walk, over the 3 censuses, I haven't yet posted it, but before I came on, about 6 o'clock this evening, I found King's Bench Walk in the 1901 census, and at that stage as well, number 9 is down as uninhabited.
Okay.
Which suggests, don't know what you read into that, whether it means, because we know Monty had chambers there, and people still do, whether it meant that there were no facilities there to actually sleep over, that they were literally just office space. But of course that would cast a new light on, whether he could have used it as a base, if he was the murderer for the time of the murders, to go back and change his clothes or whatever.
Right.
And it would also, it might also clear up this question about which premises it was that his brother searched, which was mentioned at the inquest, because William drew it. It said at the inquest at the Lamb and Tap, all it said was that his chambers had been searched. Now, it didn't make clear whether it meant when he'd been, because we knew that he lived in at the school, at Valentine's School in Elliot Place, or whether it meant the chamber, because it was this alleged search that brought to light the suicide note.
Right.
Although why he never had that on him, I don't know, because I would have thought if somebody was going to throw themselves in the river, it would make sense if you were going to write a suicide note to actually have it on your person.
Right.
Rather than leaving it in your chambers. But maybe he used logic and thought, well, if, depending on how long I'm in the water before they find me, it might rot away or just dissolve or whatever.
Right. Well,
but anyway, I shall keep posting and keep plugging away.
Well, we all appreciate all of the work you do. It's amazing.
Well, no, I enjoy it. If it's of use to others, it's great. And I've made some very, very good friends through Casebook. And as I said, it's always my first port of call. I come in, turn on the radio, turn on the broadband, and it's onto Casebook and see what's being posted. It's sort of like it's become a ritual now.
Right. Well, your work's pretty much on. I mean, it's genealogy on par with stuff that's being done on the victims like Neil Sheldon.
That's right. Well, that just as a last sort of postscript, that was one of the main, because the main. It's going to sound selfish, but I mean, it's like if. I usually use the sort of rule of thumb. If I find something that's of interest to me, with the wide readership and the wide range of interests that Casebook has got, there's a fair to middling chance it might be of interest to some other people. But the main reason I actually wrote the Kelly book was because Neil, whose research is incredible and whose 4 books are, there was the one victim he hadn't covered because he'd done victims 1 to 4, but he'd never done a book on Kelly.
Right.
And there were various sort of things, and I started thinking about it, and the more I read about it, and I thought, well, is that true? Is there any evidence that, can any of this story be substantiated? And it was, when I came to write the book, and this is no genius on my part, but when I wrote the book, Will the Real Mary Kelly, admittedly it's only 150 odd pages, but I wrote that in 3 days. Because it was only an assembly job. It was all research. It was collating. It was almost like cutting and pasting, because it was stuff I'd already done to answer questions that I was asking myself. And I thought, hang on, this might be of interest to other people. So that's entirely how it came about. Well,
again, your work and knowledge of this case is very impressive, and all of your work that you've been posting on the case, but gives us a better glimpse at the lives and the lives of the families of people either directly involved or on the periphery of the case. So we do all appreciate it.
Well, that's very kind. And I mean, anything even if it's of only interest to one person, it's been shared, and all you can do is put it out there. As a friend of mine said, it's like throwing pebbles in a pond, and the ripples go out, and if one person picks up on them, then. And as I said, I've made some very good friends, and I'll keep posting all the time I find stuff that I think might be interesting.
Well, great. We look forward to it.
And thanks for having me on the Rippercast. It's been, and I'm sorry I've blathered on so much.
Oh, it's no problem. And we do want to get you back on at some point. We'll keep in touch because I do want Paul on when he has a better connection.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.